for me as a runner, yeah, it's great to win. It's great to be out there. But at the end of the day, the biggest competitor I've got in any race is myself, because these races are tough. And at any point, the bad patch can occur.
This is Running for Real, the podcast for runners who know that for every runner's high, there are just as many lows. All those just missed PRs, easy runs that feel hard, injury blues, and more. Each week, we'll talk to running, health, and wellness experts about their highs, lows, and best advice to build our confidence. Running for Real is about being honest, being brave, and most of all, not feeling alone. And now here's our host, who enjoys reading self-help books, Tina Muir.
Hello, my friends. Welcome to episode 87 of the Running for Real podcast. I am your host, Tina Muir. Thank you so much for joining me today. Last week, you heard from my dear friend, Sarah Crouch. We got real, very real, and I hope you enjoyed that more casual conversation. Other than some extra Bailey chat, that was very much how our conversations go. And for the first American at the Chicago Marathon, she is very down to earth and humble, as I'm sure you noticed. She also shared about how a tumor threatened to mean she might never run again, and it changed her perspective. And if you haven't already listened, you can go do that and be inspired by her too, but maybe you want to finish listening to this episode first. Today, we're following on with that theme of perspective, and we're talking to Fiona Oakes. I'd heard about Fiona from a few different people and seen her story kind of making its way around the internet. And she's been featured a lot lately for the incredible things she's doing. But I want to thank Anushka for bringing her to my attention as a guest and for getting me the opportunity to talk to her. Fiona has not only got 4 world records under her name, or has she completed things that many of us will never dream of, but she's also done it after being told she would never walk again, let alone run. She has ultimately defied the odds and done it to raise awareness for other issues that she's really passionate about. I hope you enjoy this episode with Fiona, and it gives you the belief that running and what you care about outside of running actually can get on together. And you can also learn about how eating a vegan lifestyle and being a runner is not quite as scary as we might think, if you choose. I am by no means forcing anyone to eat vegan. I'm not a vegan myself, but I did find it fascinating to learn from Fiona. Now, just a quick word from our friends at Body Health and one other company who deeply cares for this world we live in, just like Fiona, Bombas, and we'll be right to the episode. Thank you to Body Health for sponsoring this episode of the Running for Real podcast. I am so thankful to Body Health and their support, not just of this podcast, but of me through their perfect amino products. They help me recover faster and feel better. You too can get 10% off at bodyhealth.com using code TINA10. You know, I genuinely care about the brands that I choose to share with you. That's why I turned down a big brand recently, as I really disliked their product, so I backed out. But I'm so excited to introduce you to a new sponsor, Bombas Socks. It is just in time for marathon season, and I'm always telling you that you need to practice with your outfit before the day. Well, now's the perfect time to get some new socks to wear on race day, and I'll tell you about why I love them so much later in the show. Fiona, thank you so much for joining me on this episode of the Running for Real podcast. I am really excited for others to learn from you. It's actually one of my community members who brought you to my attention, and I'm so thankful for that because your story is just amazing. So thank you for being here. I'm really excited to have you.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, this is going to be fun. Okay, but I want to begin. Going into this research, I have never really come across someone who, correct me if I'm wrong, but from what I was reading, you don't really see running as something that you absolutely enjoy and just love and maybe feel passionate about in the same way as many of our listeners. So this is going to be really interesting to see how your perspective is on running, but I'd love for you to tell me in your own words about that, whether running is kind of a job for you or if you do see it as something, well, I enjoy parts of it, but overall, it's not my favorite thing.
Yeah, it's a means to an end for me. That's how I came about running. That's how I identified running was going to be the sport for me. The circumstances were very heavy dictators on what I would and wouldn't be able to do in terms of time and finance, to be brutally honest. Mm-hmm. And I came to running kind of by accident. I had a lot of surgeries in my teenage years, and I was told at the time I would never walk again properly, let alone ever be able to run.
Let me just pause you there. Did you run before all that started happening?
Yeah, I was a very athletic kid. You know, okay. I was the kid at school that was always picked for the teams. I was always like kind of team captain. I always enjoyed sport. Before the surgeries, yes, I ran. I was very athletic minded, but I was in the netball team. I was in the hockey team. You know, I was doing pretty much everything. I loved being outside. I loved a kid that loved being outside. Mm-hmm. And as a career at one point, I actually wanted to join the RAF, but I couldn't because of the knee injury. So I came to running. I kind of accidentally fell into running. I never thought it would be something that I would be able to do very well. But the need in me, the reason I was running actually drove me to kind of that next level, or if you like the pun, to take the extra mile, to improve in the way I have. I always say I feel very guilty when I say I don't enjoy running. I absolutely am so grateful for the fact that I am able to get out there and run, because I know there are so many people that for whatever reason aren't. It's just that because I've always wanted to really get the maximum out of myself for a different reason behind my running, my training sessions tend to be very, very full on. So, okay, I might enjoy them when I've completed them, or I might look back and think, you know, I nailed that one, or, you know, that race I did as the best I could in. The training is very, very hard, and I'm kind of always torn between getting the best out of myself in that session and then kind of worrying about the next one. Will I be able to recover in time to do the next one? So I push myself very, very hard. I don't tend to be a pleasure runner. It's always looking for the best I can get out of myself. And that is kind of quite brutal over the years that it's been, yeah.
I think that's actually quite refreshing to hear because, you know, from myself coming from the elite professional world, it was very much a case of that. Yes, there would be some runs that were just pure joy, but most of them, they had a purpose. They had a reason. I was getting it done. So I think it's good to hear that because I think we all go through that. I mean, I would struggle to find anyone who isn't in marathon training or in training for a race that doesn't go through periods of time like that. But we are often painted this picture of this rosy thing and everything about running is enjoying. And I can kind of see how people who aren't runners can think, why would I do that? Because it's not fun for me. And when, you know, runners are saying, oh, it's so much fun, they probably get a bit confused. So I think it's great to hear you say that. And, you know, you talked about it being, you kind of accidentally fell into it. Having all these operations as a teenager, being in and out of hospital, could you tell us like what was going on and how did that lead you to, you know, accidentally kind of falling into running?
Well, when I was finished with all the surgeries, I'd literally had so much time out of school that I pretty much got no real foundation for education or a career. And I went to Oxford to study there. And obviously I got into cycling at the time because everyone cycles in Oxford. And I thought, well, cycling is something that I can actually do because it's low impact, it's continual motion, it's much more gentle on the knees. So I spent some time cycling. Then I moved to London to work, and pretty much bike racing was my thing, track and road, until I met my partner. Met him by total accident. Pretty much everything in my life has been done by total accident. I was working at the place. I've been sent to temp at the place where Martin worked, and I was living in rented accommodation with a huge menagerie of animals that I shouldn't have had in this rented accommodation. And the lady who owned it turned up one day and said, well, actually, I kind of want to sell the house. And I thought, oh, my goodness, I'm going to have to find somewhere else that I can rent with all these animals, which wasn't easy. So at the time, my parents said, you know, you're really going to need to buy somewhere. So I looked to buy somewhere, and it didn't actually, the dates didn't coincide from leaving the rented accommodation to moving into the one that I was purchasing. So my boss, Nigel, said to me, look, I kind of feel responsible for you. You've got nowhere to live. You're going to be homeless. My secretary is going to be homeless. And I said, you know, with the best will in the world, he offered me to go and live with him in Wimbledon. And I said, Nigel, I don't know what your wife's going to think when you turn up with me and like a whole menagerie of dogs and chinchillas and hamsters and chickens and all these bikes. And he said, well, I see your point. Where are you buying this house? And I said, it's in a small village in Essex. And he said, well, actually, one of the people on the dealing floor, Martin, actually lives in that village. And I happen to know he's just bought a house. So he literally marched me around to Martin's desk, and I'm standing there, and he said, you know Fiona, Martin, you know Fiona, can she come and live with you for a while? And he I don't think he wanted to upset Nigel because he was the boss. And he said, okay, yes, okay, for a short while, that's okay. And I kind of moved in. And I never really moved out. And we started the rescue on a bigger scale as both working in London. Yeah. And that's how it kind of happened. And when I say I fell into running, I literally fell into running because circumstances dictated that one of the horses that we got at a farm, Oscar, he had a bad accident due to the negligence of the farm owner. When we were at work earning the money to pay him his £800 a week for looking after them, he had decided to let people go into Oscar's field and shoot rabbits. Oscar had become impaled on a fence, and he was at the vet for 13 weeks. And it was in that period of time we said we've got to change the model that we run here if we want to continue rescuing animals. So we decided we were going to try and buy a place, which we successfully did. And I was going to stay at home and look after the animals, and Martin was going to continue working to pay for them. But that wasn't enough for me because I want to continually move forward. I want to promote veganism in a positive way. I've been vegan all my life practically. I kind of thought, I'm rescuing animals and, whether I rescue 40, 400, 4,000, I'm not actually addressing the reason that they're needing rescue. I want to do something else. And I thought, well, I'm very restricted. I'm living very rurally. I'm pretty much tied around looking after the animals all the time. What can I do? And at the time, Paula Radcliffe was actually the real catalyst. She was doing so. She'd come back from sort of I won't say disastrous track career, but a very, very disappointing Sydney Olympics, to suddenly breaking the world marathon record. So obviously everyone in the UK was talking about marathon running, and I thought, well, everybody's talking about this, which people didn't really know too much about the event. I mean, a lot of people didn't even know how far a marathon was. And indeed, even today, people say, how long's that marathon?
Yeah.
They're all 26.2 miles. But anyway, Paula had kind of created the platform, the interest in this country, an event which actually had probably been overlooked until that point, because I think, certainly from the perspective of people in the UK, they thought it was a little bit unattainable to be the best in the world, because obviously the Kenyans and the Ethiopians were dominating in that field. And all of a sudden a British woman is coming out and producing these prodigious times. So I thought, well, perhaps if I could at least complete a marathon, then it would show that a vegan can be strong and fit and do this amazing endurance event, which at the time was considered the most challenging event on the athletics calendar. And so I kind of thought, okay, I was told I couldn't run when I was a teenager, but I was told a lot of things. Perhaps if I started to jog, I'm very fit, I'm very healthy, I get about, I do all this work with the animals. And then it kind of went from there. But it was in the early noughties when you simply could not go onto a computer and Google search, Runner's World Sub-3 Marathon Training Program. It was all done by trial and error. And the equation was, it's all been a simple equation. Be the best you can, because the better you are, the better platform you can have to speak out.
Yes.
So
okay.
It's, that's basically how I fell into it.
So the primary reason that you started running, and I guess still are, and doing some of these amazing feats that we're going to talk about in a minute, is to raise awareness for kind of your sanctuary, Tower Hill Stables Animal Sanctuary. Is that the primary reason here? Truthfully,
yes and no. As a runner, you probably, when I decided, okay, this is a tough event. This isn't 2 half marathons back to back. The training is different if you want to do well in a marathon. I did kind of sit back. I approached coaches for help, and they said, for sure, you're okay at 10K, you've got decent half marathon time. But if we invest in you regarding our time and effort, you've got this kind of bizarre diet, which is probably going to be prohibitive to actually getting the best out of yourself. So we kind of want to leave you alone and move on to somebody that we can work with more fully and understand more fully what's going on in their head, which is actually eat, drink, and train the best you can, in our opinion, to get the best results. So I kind of I had to formulate my own training program, and I realized it was probably going to have to be around 100 miles a week with 3 speed sessions and hills and long runs and, the midweek stuff. And I kind of sat back and thought, this is going to be a heavy investment of time and energy. Is it going to be productive in the end? And I thought, well, yes, because if you do well in a race, then people say, hey, you did really well there, a little bit of background about yourself. What do you do? And of course, then you can mention the animal sanctuary, but also you can promote veganism by talking about your diet as well. So I thought, yeah, it could be productive for both angles. Predominantly, though, it was to promote veganism and just the idea that you can do this entirely plant-based. And that's why we started the Vegan Runner Club back in 2004, because I was getting the invitations and the championship and elite starts and invited to Berlin Marathon or invited to Amsterdam. And we wanted, you've got to be in an affiliated club vest. Mainly for London, we realised that. At the time, I was running for Vegetarian Cycling and Athletics Club, which was the only affiliated club with any kind of nuance towards what I was actually running for. But then we decided, if you're going to be on the front line in London, now would be a good time to be on that front line promoting that word for the masses to see, vegan. So that's predominantly why I have always run, to promote veganism and the knock-on effects it has for the sanctuary.
Okay, great. Thank you for explaining that. And you've gone on to do some great events, getting lots of exposure for those things. From what I was reading about you have 4 world records, the fastest time to complete a marathon on each continent, aggregate, the fastest aggregate time to complete a marathon on each continent, fastest time to complete a marathon on each continent and the North Pole. These are quite confusing. I feel like someone listening, you're probably going to have to pause this and think about it, because I'm saying this very fast, but I'm trying to say it. And finally, fastest time to complete a half marathon in animal costume, which my question for that is, what costume did you use for that?
I used a cow costume.
Okay, cool.
And the reason I used a cow costume, people say, why on earth did you run in a cow costume? And the reason I ran in the cow costume was that people would ask me why the cow costume, and I could explain the horrors of the dairy industry.
Okay.
In a passive way, in a kind of a conversational way, in a way that people are interested, rather than just forcing it down. Dairy is so horribly cruel. Make them ask, and that's why I picked the cow costume, basically, because I wanted to kind of introduce passive conversation if people were interested, but if not, fine.
Okay, great. Thank you for explaining that, and definitely a strategic choice there. And I appreciate you explaining that to us. And you also have a PR in the marathon of 2:38, which explains why you were invited to many of these races at the time. But what about why go for these, intercontinental races where you're traveling all over, going to places like the North Pole? You mentioned earlier about getting conversations going. Well, is there a part of your story that's like, okay, well, why would you go there where no one really is going to be watching, not many people? Is it just because it, might get picked up by a news source and then it kind of has the potential to go viral? Why do that over, trying to get nearer the front of, like you said, the London Marathon or races where you're going to see a lot more people along the course?
Yeah, I think, to be honest with you, I totally see that. For instance, I think when you've run your best on the road. When you've done your best on the road. And although I was getting a relative publicity for the sanctuary, it wasn't really achieving what I wanted for the veganism. So you then try and mix it up all the time. Perhaps if, you pick smaller races and you go and win them, or more extreme races. And I think at the time I've been kind of literally doing the 2 marathons a year, turning up, all focused for about 4 or 5 months on one morning, either in the spring or the autumn. It got a little bit much with the lifestyle I was leading at home, with the sanctuary, with the firefighting, everything else. Trying to combine it all was getting really, really tough. And I've always said, if I don't think I'm achieving what I want for the goal I'm achieving, I wasn't a professional runner, never considered myself to be that great, I'll go and do something else. And at the time, somebody said to me, why don't you do the toughest foot race in the world? And I thought, well, what's that? Marathon des Sables, the desert race, MDS. And I thought, that sounds like a good idea, proving that you can run fast, you can win races, then going off and doing something completely different. Wasn't sure I'd be able to do a race like that because I do suffer still with my knee in that I do kind of limp. It's very apparent the way I run that I limp. And I kind of throw my weight really off my right foot onto my left leg. I was also getting a little bit of problems with my left knee because putting in the kind of mileage and the kind of intensity that you need to do for road running, I personally feel that for me, lacking any sort of talent, I pretty much had to train very, very hard all the time. And I always trained on the road, and it was very, very high impact. And I kind of thought, if I'm going to get problems, I'll try some off-road stuff. I went to MDS. It wasn't a great day at the office, my first MDS, because
I'm just going to clarify that's Marathon des Sables, just for people. Look it up if you haven't heard of it. Keep going.
Yeah, it's basically a week-long self-sufficiency race in the Sahara Desert, roughly a marathon a day, one day a double marathon, 50-degree heat plus.
Celsius, that is.
Yeah. It's a toughie. I kind of, I didn't really know what to expect when I went out there. It's probably just as well, because if I had done, I probably wouldn't have gone. But unfortunately, the week before the race, one of the horses at the sanctuary, she stood on my foot and broke two of my toes. And then I'm faced with going to the toughest foot race on the planet with two fractured toes, which probably wasn't the most sensible thing to do. But I'd put so much effort into not only training for that race, but preparing for it, and the kit and everything that you needed. I got the shoes one size too big, all stitched up with Velcro, so the nasty sand couldn't get in there. I kind of thought, well, I'm going to go and just see if I can get around it. It was extraordinarily hard with the fractured toes. And indeed, by the long stage, you could see the bone sticking out of one of the toes, the little toe. But I kept going purely because I wanted to be the first vegan woman to do it. And you might say, well, what's the vegan element making it so difficult? Back in 2012, it was quite hard. There weren't the expedition foods. There weren't the bars available. There weren't the recovery shakes available to you as a plant-based athlete. And even the kit I took, like the sleeping bag, was enormously heavy because even today, the lighter stuff tends to be the downfill stuff. So I got this enormous great backpack and I'm trudging through the desert with the broken toes. I did the race and I enjoyed the concept of the race. I really was thrilled by it. Wasn't just a race. It was a life-changing experience. It is a life-changing experience if you allow it to be so, in terms of the fact you really experience denial and desperation. You really do start putting yourself in the position of people that have no food, that have no water, and they have that for their whole lives, not just for a week in a tent in a race. I did effect a rescue of a lady on the first day. She was really, really struggling, a lady in my tent. And because of this, the race said, if you feel that you want to come back next year, hopefully without broken toes, we would offer you a place to do so. And I thought, that's great. I'm going to go away and I'm going to really look into how to train for this race properly. It was something completely, completely alien to me as a road runner. And in the meantime, I was, came out high as a kite, and I was looking for kind of other challenges, similar challenges. And one of my other friends, and I know people say, gosh, you've got some very strange friends that keep suggesting these weird things to you, Fiona, said, look, you've done the Marathon des Sables. That's basically what people want, the rubber stamp. I've done this race and I've completed it. Why don't you consider the polar marathons? And I actually thought that's absolutely ludicrous. So it cannot be a marathon at the North Pole. I could not work out how it could possibly be that way. But I looked into it, and sure enough, there is a marathon at the North Pole, but it was too expensive for me to even consider entering. It's a very, very expensive race. So I kind of registered interest, but didn't take it any further, and thought I would just go back to MDS in 2013 and give that a proper try. And totally out of the blue, the race organizer of the North Pole Marathon contacted me at the back end of 2012 and said, if you want to consider doing this race, I'll give you the place if you'll come in 2013. And I suppose that's how I kind of fell into going out there. I did consider whether it was a wise choice to go out there for many, many reasons. Promoting veganism, not only for animal welfare, but for the environment, and then going off and flying to the North Pole did seem a little bit contradictory to me, even at the time. And I did actually have an experience out there which completely and utterly shocked the heck out of me in terms of when I finished the race. You stay at Camp Barnia, which is a Russian research base, which they allow the race to use for the 24 hours that you're out there. The quicker runners, if the weather permits, are offered the opportunity to actually go to the geographic North Pole. And, they get the sign out, London, 2,000 miles, New York, that kind of thing. Every photograph's taken. But on the way out there in the chopper, it was only a couple of miles, one of the Russian researchers actually pointed out of the window to me a polar bear coming out of an ice pool. And I'd actually thought that the polar ice cap was covered in ice. I didn't realize that it was that fragile. And he actually said to me, there is a school of thought that the North Pole will not be covered by ice in 20 years. Mm-hmm. In his opinion, it would be nearer to 10 years. And that was in 2013. So that's how I kind of fell into that kind of running. And strangely enough, and rather hurtfully enough to actually serious road runners who really, really train. And I know how people train for the times that, they get on the road, and it's brutal. Those kind of events seem to trigger more interest than the fast road running. Even though, and people actually, when you say, what's the hardest race you've ever done or the hardest thing you've ever done, I still pretty much always say, train for a fast marathon.
Really?
And yeah. For sure, these races are very, very hard. Logistically, you've got to have the expertise of knowledge, of knowing yourself, that running in a road marathon capacity gives to you. You've got to be able to dig extraordinarily deep, and you've got to know yourself very, very well. But I would say to you to go out logistically and to run a marathon at North Pole or Antarctica is very, very difficult. But the one thing you've really got to watch for in these races is hypothermia. Mm-hmm. You've got to, and what you do, unless you're going to run a negative split in a marathon, you tend to slow down towards the end of a race. And if you slow down in these temperatures, you will get hypothermia. You will definitely get hypothermia. If you can remain at a constant pace from start to finish, raise the body temperature, and then keep it there, you will probably be okay in these races. Because I got that expertise of training and knowing myself very well, I knew a pace that I felt confident that I could knock out for 26.2 miles, not slow down, and therefore not get the dreaded hypothermia, which is going to really, really stall you. It was difficult. I mean, I'm not going to lie. Yeah, you were having to cut off your head covering. It was frozen to your face, and it was scary. I mean, at one point I did think, am I getting like frostbite in my big toe? It's getting very, very cold. Mm-hmm. But when you've got a wealth of miles in your legs that a road runner has, I mean, people say, how do you train for marathon to sample? How do you train to run 156 miles in a week? And I say, if you look at what a lot of road runners are doing, they're training between 100, 110, 120 miles every week, building up towards the taper of a marathon. So you've got an enormous amount of miles in your legs when you go out there, coming from a road running background. So that's kind of how I fell into these more weird and wonderful events. And as a kind of a road runner, I would have thought at one point you would have fallen off the end of the earth if you tried to run further than 26.2 miles. And funnily enough, one of the most difficult things to transition between the two kinds of running is the idea that you have to stop during probably your training and during the race, because you are geared. That's the one thing you do not want to do in a road marathon. You do not want to stop. And then all of a sudden, even with the training, when you go out, you think, right, I've got 20 miles to train, A to B, as fast as I can, or, at the pace I want to run, no stopping. And then you think, no, actually, Fiona, you need to be on your feet for a long period of time. So to stop and then get started again is a technique that you've got to learn.
Yeah.
rather than just keep going. So when I was at the North Pole and I won the race and I placed with the men and, did whatever up there, it was some of the people who do that kind of running that said, obviously if you can go off and you can run a marathon on every continent, then in time elapsed, because you're doing the Antarctic race anyway, I'd put myself down for that one, you'd possibly have a world record there if you did it. And to me, it wasn't the idea of just having some world record. It was the positivity that would bring, that somebody who is a plant-based athlete, and there is negativity towards plant-based sports people, having the endurance or the kind of longevity, that the simple equation for me when I chose the North Pole races, if people come in out of the cold, they say, "Ooh, it's bitter out there. It's like the North Pole." And if they come in and sort of say, "Oh, I'm worn out. I feel like I've run a marathon," if you put the two together, then you've got something that definitively kind of stamps, gosh, that person's got a lot of endurance and a lot of tenacity. So that was kind of the North Pole thing. And then I came back and I put the world record thing on the back burner purely like everyone else would. Economics and, not just financial economics, but, time constraints, jetting off to every continent to do a marathon just isn't in the remit of most people unless you've got an awful lot of time and an awful lot of money on your hands, which I hadn't got either. It's going to be supremely difficult to do. Yeah. So I kind of just put that to bed, and it kind of niggled at me for 2, 3, 4 months. And then I decided that actually it probably would be worth it just for what I was trying to achieve, which isn't just times in races and trophies. And it was never been about that. I'm not a prodigious runner. I don't do lots of local races. It was just fixating on big events, and the better I could be in those events, or if you could win an event, then the better publicity and promotion you would get for the reason you were actually out there doing that event, which was to promote veganism rather than just to do well for myself. Mm-hmm. And then I left it very, very late. In the end, my parents, who backed me all the way, over many, many, many years, getting the sanctuary, doing everything I've done, said, the only thing we've got left is the house. And if you really need to do this that badly, we'll remortgage it and let you go off and do it. And then I just trundled off. And then it left me in a quite kind of difficult position, because every week or every other week I was going to have to go to a different continent. Like I went to Australia, had to place in the marathon and come home in less than 4 days, and then be literally back on the Monday after the race for Martin to go to work, and then me go off to Africa on the Friday and do the same thing again. So it was very, very difficult logistically, but it was something that I just wanted to do to promote what I believe in. And people say now, Vegan Runners is actually now in 2018, I think it's the largest by number membership running club in the country. But at the time, I was literally the only vegan in the village. So now Vegan Runners, in order to gain awareness for what they're all about and they're running for, they will take, mass takeovers, a park run or something like that. At the time, I was the only vegan runner doing it. So the idea was, well, rather than be lost in the crowd of 50,000 runners at the Berlin Marathon, it would be better to be up there on the front line with Haile Gebrselassie to get that promotion that I was craving for, not myself, but for the vegan vest, and just to let people see that the vegan presence was there. Okay. So that's kind of what my run has all been about. It's been about kind of tactically for the animals. Same thing with, like going back to Marathon des Sables and doing those events again. I haven't had the best run of luck in Marathon des Sables, even though I love the event. In 2014, I went back and I really was prepared to go out there and hit it as hard as I could, knowing that descending is impossible for me with the injury that I've got, where I've got no kneecap, and literally it isn't physically possible for me to descend very well. Climbing, I'm not too bad, but I'm always having to protect my knee. But I wanted to go back and see how well I could perform in that race. I think that was the race that I went out there just for me. Mm-hmm. Can I do it? Mm-hmm. And I was overall 8th place before the long stage. And one guy in my tent, Mike Julian, he had leukemia, and he was on chemotherapy and out there desperately trying to complete the event, to prove to others that no amount of physical challenge can stop you doing this. If he can do Marathon des Sables, taking chemotherapy with leukemia, it shouldn't be a barrier. Don't let cancer be a barrier to you. And he was really struggling in the first day or two, and he came back to the tent on the second day crying and said, I'm going to have to pack up. I just can't do this. It's too tough. And even if I do the next day, I'm never going to get through the long stage. So I think that race is all about compassion over competition. And I said, look, Mike, if you get through tomorrow and you still want to do the long stage, I'll stay with you and I'll help you. And I had kind of hoped that one of the other competitors who were going to walk it might offer to step in and say, he can walk round with us, or we'll mentor him round. And nobody did. And I remember laying in my bunk or in my bag on the night before the long stage. And I kind of was thinking, it looks like Mike isn't going to come back to camp. It was getting dark and he'd obviously been out there a long time. And then I heard the clapping at the finish line, and it was Mike. So I went to see who it was. And he threw himself into my arms and said, oh, please, does your offer still stand for tomorrow? Will you help me get round the long stage, please? And I did. We were out there for nearly 20 hours and reminding him to take his chemo and giving him my water and whatever. But he got round. So I had to throw my race away in the end.
It's
I did
so worth it, I'm sure.
It was worth it. It was worth it. It really was worth it. Because for me as a runner, it's great to win. It's great to be out there. But at the end of the day, personally, the biggest competitor I've got in any race is myself, because these races are tough, and at any point the bad patch can occur and the wheels can drop off very, very quickly. So I do know what it's like to be out there suffering. So it was worth it to help him achieve his personal goal. I wouldn't do it any differently.
Great. Well, thank you so much for sharing that. You have just answered about 10 of my questions throughout that. So I'm kind of a bit going to have to jump around a bit to kind of ask you some things that I want to know and some of my community wants to know. But I'm going to start with the veganism, as you have talked, extensively about that and how important it is to you. Maybe tell us, you did mention there are some nutritional challenges. What are some of them that you see being vegan, particularly in these ultramarathon events? And then from there, what are the challenges, and then how do you overcome them? So maybe give us 2 or 3 things that people may see as a challenge and what you do to get around it.
Yeah, I think the challenges are becoming a lot more diminished over the last few years. The rise of veganism has been completely and utterly astronomical. From a time when people didn't even know what vegan was, you couldn't buy any products in the shops, there was absolutely nothing available. I've had to kind of work my own very, very basic diet out. The main challenges to the extreme, I would say, for a normal training program for a marathon where you are at home and you can supervise your own food, there is no challenge whatsoever. There certainly hasn't ever been for me. I'm not sure. I've been vegan since I was 6 years old. So there has been no real before and after transitional period, addiction to cheese that people come across, loads of things that people, how would I manage without my recovery shakes? There's been none of that for me, because I've kind of self-inspired my own diet, if you like. The challenge when you are actually traveling or doing these ultra races was always, how do you get the weight of the food down that you need for a week when there aren't the products available? I used to sit around campfires and look at people who had sort of 100-gram porridge with 1,000 calories in it. And I'd be looking at my kind of great big weighty Mar Baker bars thinking they're only 400 calories each, and I've got to get 3 of these down this morning kind of thing, because there weren't the substitute foods. There weren't the kind of hydrated meals. And even now they aren't as high calorie, because I think they make up the calories with cream and fat, animal fat. For myself, personally, I've never seen it as a challenge to fuel myself for running on a plant-based diet, because that's all I have ever known. People don't really understand how much protein there is in vegetables and plants. You can get all your daily proteins from plants alone.
Okay, so what would be some examples of those?
Well, there are spinach and mushrooms, and obviously I use a lot of nuts. That's one of the main sources, I think, of proteins and fats that I have. Spinach, nuts. I take a lot of whole foods. I eat very, very basic beans, pulses, rice, pasta, fresh vegetables. People say, what do you have on the long distance? Do you take any, do you use gels and things like that? I don't actually use gels. I prefer, because my diet is very natural at home, I tend to keep it natural when I'm training. So I use dried fruits, dates, brilliant for energy. And my secret weapon is marzipan. I love marzipan on long runs because it's just straight in and you just like a sugar rush. You just like flying along. But it's just I don't really consider my diet as a vegan diet. It's just another kind of runner's diet. Yeah. And I think a lot of the things people were saying, when I came back from the Atacama Crossing last week, as if my diet is something very different to theirs. And when we actually sat down and analysed it, most of the runners were practically vegan, apart from a little bit of fish and a little bit of chicken. They were practically on a plant-based diet, but didn't really consider it to be plant-based. But because it was very, very healthy and they were really, really considering their diet, they didn't really realise it was practically vegan too. So, yeah, I mean, I use things like chia seeds, spirulina now, but they weren't available a while ago. I've only just started using these products. Hemp's another one that's really, really good, but very basic stuff. And I don't take vitamin B12, but I am absolutely addicted to Marmite. So I'll probably get all my B12 from Marmite. But that's basically the protein sources that I get.
Okay.
Like a lot of runners would actually get them from, lentils, they're high in protein.
Yeah, you've given us enough examples there, and thank you for explaining that, because I know it, like you said, it's more kind of the mindset of changing people's perspectives. And I know this isn't quite the same. Like you said, a lot of people do end up somewhat vegan a little bit, with obviously not being vegan because they do have the meat and the fish and stuff. But I find myself a lot, as you said, with the whole foods, you end up eating, if you do eat a lot of those foods, you're not really having that much meat and animal products overall. And my daughter, I just found out, has an egg allergy. So when it comes to baking, everything has eggs in it. So I've been searching for vegan recipes a lot of the time because I know they're safe, and I've really been enjoying it. I mean, you could, in many of the recipes, you could never even tell, and it's been kind of opening my eyes up to just possibilities of ways around things in a way that before I think it was more my mindset that thought, oh, that's so extreme, I don't know if I could do that. But it's not as much as we think. So thank you for explaining that. That is helpful. And one other thing I wanted to talk to related to that, you mentioned, that sustainability, the environment is really important to you, and another reason you are a vegan as well. And you also said about you were kind of having some turmoil over the travel. How did you kind of get over that with traveling to these events, going to Australia, going to the North Pole, knowing that was, fuel consumption, pollution? You obviously were adding in some way to the footprint on our environment. And I want to thank Lucy for that question. That's a great one. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on how you are kind of finding peace with that.
Yeah, I mean, I do live very, very humbly at home. And for instance, we never do any recreational travel whatsoever. We never, I mean, for me and my partner, we've been 21 years, 22 years running a sanctuary. We've never been anywhere together. We don't eat out. We've never been anywhere together in terms of like to the cinema even. We don't leave the sanctuary together. So we don't go on holiday. I am very, very economical with the use of my vehicles at home. I'm very, very economical with the use of everything actually at home, washing, everything like that. And I did actually think, is this the right thing to be doing? But at the time, and this is before social media, I think people forget a time before social media and when it was so easy to just actually put your message out there in a forum which everyone will see. It was, how do I want to speak out, but I have no platform whatsoever to do that. I need to build a platform from which I can speak out, and or remain silent. And the only thing I got available to me was a semi-decent ability athletically, and the events that I was doing weren't really achieving what I wanted them to do in terms of promoting veganism. I did give it a try. I did give the big city marathons a try and all that sort of thing. So then I looked alternatively for what I could do. And I did find, and it's as I've said to you, that these marathons were the ones that gave me the voice. So I kind of then had to work out, is the voice and the presence I'm getting with which to speak out worthy of the traveling that I'm doing?
Mm-hmm.
And I did decide that it was, given the lifestyle that I've led over the years. But I didn't want to do them. I didn't want to do any of this. I would have been much happier to just be able to voice my message on the internet and people listen. But the facts were people weren't listening. They really, really were. It was impossible to do that. And in fact, I was in Los Angeles about a month and a half ago. And I was there for a conference and the film launch. And I actually was speaking to someone, doing a podcast with somebody, a guy called Nimai Delgado, who's one of these huge internet presence people. And he came to my room to do the podcast and he started setting up and we were chatting. And I said, Nimai, if all that equipment was taken away from you now and you simply couldn't put it out to your 200,000, 300,000 Instagram followers, how would you get your message out there if you had to use the mainstream media as I did at the time? And he said, I don't know. Don't know how I would do that. And that is honestly the case. I have wrestled with it, but I honestly do think that the good and positivity I've garnered from doing it has been worth it, because I would just have had to stay at home, a silent voice. I didn't have another opportunity, a way of speaking out for what I wanted to speak out for.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you. And we appreciate you being honest with that about, you did wrestle with it and you did try and find a way of getting your message out there. But at the time, there wasn't a way. And this has obviously been a very effective way. I've seen plenty of people sharing Running for Good, which we're going to talk about in just a few minutes for anyone who is wondering more about your story and what it was you've been able to do. But for someone who's listening and thinking, okay, you're doing these races, you're not doing it for the time, you're not doing it for the medal, you're doing it to promote things that are important to you. How can someone listening go beyond the results within their own running? If one of us wants to think, okay, there's something that I really care about, I really want to bring some light to it, I really want to do something special. What would your words of inspiration be for someone to do something a bit out there and a bit different? As like you said, in those big race marathons, you could wear a shirt, but the chances of people seeing it are very small. But you could do something extraordinary that someone listening might not currently think they could do. What would be your advice?
Be creative in what you do. Be creative. Identify your abilities and what you want to get back from it. I mean, obviously, don't kind of just force yourself to go and climb Everest or something because you feel you've got to do that. I mean, you've got to. I mean, don't put your goals too high, kind of thing that you're never going to. And it's just going to completely implode around you. But just be aware and very aware of the reason you're out there and the need to be out there, and measure that up against the time and effort and energy level it's going to take you that you have at your disposal to actually make you want to do this. I mean, for me, it's been I won't say it's been very, very easy, but I am very lucky in that I am constantly connected with the cause and reason that I am out there. I have always rescued animals. I am always amongst those animals. Those animals are what inspires me to go out there and do what I'm doing. I realize that when I say I am out there for a different reason than most people, I completely and utterly respect and revere those people that are out there for other reasons. This is just the way I kind of fell into the running. Don't feel guilt that you're not out there sort of beating out times in marathons or anything like that. I think one of the main things I would say is you never know the impact you're having. So you could be probably 6.5 hours running around in the London Marathon, and somebody, if you want to raise awareness for a cause, somebody might pick up on that. Don't ever underestimate your own impact in whatever you're doing. And from a perspective of the vegan movement, myself, my own experience, people can put you on a pedestal a little bit. How do I be like you? Don't look to be like me. Look to be yourself, because being yourself, you can probably do far more than I have just by allowing yourself to go in the direction you need to go in, rather than feeling that you must follow that person's model because that has worked. It may have worked for them, but it might not work for you. So be yourself. And if you allow yourself to be true, then you're probably going to achieve that goal, or whatever that goal might be. You might be running for a cause. If you're just out there to run a good time, don't beat yourself up because you're not out there for a cause. If that's your cause, then follow that cause.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Because, it's not easy. There's no kind of one set definition, but always be aware that, everyone is different and everybody's trigger is different.
Okay, great. Thank you for explaining that. And I'm so glad you mentioned kind of at every level you can inspire and you can do something unique, and don't discredit it just because you're not at the front, because I think that's very important for a lot of people listening. I know a lot of you kind of talk to me saying, well, I'm just a mid-pack runner. I'm just a back of the pack runner. But Fiona is exactly right. You never know who is watching your Facebook. You never know who is kind of paying attention to what you're doing, what you're saying. You can still kind of inspire and support other people around you. And so I'm just so glad you mentioned that. So thank you so much, Fiona, for the
just on another point, people say to me, oh, but I could never win a race. But you are winning. You are winning because you are beating all those people that are not out there at all. You are, so what I mean, winning is not necessarily the person who comes first. Winning is beating the goals and challenges that you face to actually be out there. And, as I say, with everybody doing a marathon, obviously there's got to be a winner in terms of the person first past the post. But everyone deserves recognition. Everyone out there on a Sunday or rushing home from work and panicking, I'm going to be back in time to do that 10K run I need to do tonight. Everyone's a winner,
Absolutely.
Everyone out there's a winner.
Love that. Thank you so much. That's a great quote right there. Okay, I want to ask you, as you have done both, you have obviously learned to deal with it. For someone who is coming up on, let's start with a hot marathon or a race. If you have a hot race coming up, what are some things you found helpful in preparing for it?
Yeah, I do not have a coach. I'm going to tell you this. I've got no one guiding me anyway. So I've had to kind of formulate my own ways of doing things. And I kind of watch races and I listen to commentaries and I listen to Paula Radcliffe commentating on the Commonwealth Games. And she said, if you don't train hard, you won't race hard. That's been my formula. I mean, I know there's been kind of lots of swings and roundabouts. Should people train hard? Should people pull back? And not? Everyone's different. I've always had to go out and pretty much train really, really hard. So when I've kind of thought I'm going to go and do a hot race, I have no way of going out there and acclimatizing. I've got to kind of rely on the fitness I've gained, which will allow me to cope with the heat when I get there. So for that, I have tried the kind of running in the silly suits and the sauna suits and that sort of thing. It doesn't really work. It just be as fit as you can for the hot races, to be honest with you. Be as fit as you possibly can. I've just come back from the Atacama crossing, which is a really, really tough race. And to add to it, it's at really, really high altitude. It's about 13,500 feet on the first stage. I didn't factor in any of what I'd need to for the altitude because I've got no opportunity to do so. Mm-hmm. People said, are you going to take altitude sickness tablets? You really don't want to be running out there in that kind of on tablets. So I said no. I know with altitude it's different. Fitness doesn't necessarily have an indicator to how you're going to cope with altitude. But for me, it's all been about preparation and preparing on the very tiny things that I can focus on. I do have some bizarre things going on that people don't necessarily want to hear about, but they do work for me in terms of pre-race fueling. I have always kind of, to put it kind of tactfully, you can be as fit as you like for a marathon, but if you turn up on race day and get stomach cramps in the race, your time is going to be out of the window. Mm-hmm. So I have paid attention to things like not just food consumption, but food evacuation on the other, that kind of tiny little thing that makes a difference. Uh-huh. Preparing for the races, literally go out on the hottest time of day, and do your long runs would be what I would say. That's all I've ever had available to me. I've never been able to sort of say, a week's training in Eldoret, nothing like that. It's just been literally, or, my friend's got a villa in Spain you can go to and train. Never been able to do anything like that. It's literally been from, April's cold weather to the 50-odd degree heat of the Sahara Desert, hoping that my pre-race preparation in terms of just physical fitness is going to carry me through. Obviously, work out for something like that what your electrolyte and your salt intake is going to be and what works for you. Also, another thing is for me, I don't have an awful lot of money for specialised food and anything around my training. So one of my main indicators would be, even wherever you're going, don't suddenly change your regime drastically just because you're in a hot country. So, for instance, don't suddenly think I must take 100 gels with me and use them during a race. If you don't train with it, don't race with it, kind of thing would be my main tip.
I think that's the goes across the board. No matter what kind of race you're doing, is not to try anything new on race day. But good reminder there, especially with extreme temperatures, it can be tempting to change things and kind of panic. And let's talk about cold. Anything you would suggest for cold, or if someone is starting to maybe the weather took a turn for the worse a few days before their race, what would you suggest there?
For the cold, I think you've got to pretty much judge it on. Obviously, it's quite difficult. If you're just doing a road marathon, just doing a road marathon or just doing a road race kind of thing. Obviously, pre-race preparation with regard to keep yourself as warm as you can right up until the start of the race. But for me, in the extreme cold temperatures, it's all been about consistency. You've got to be very, very consistent in your pace. My body management, being a runner for me has been a little bit like being a pilot, always paying attention to the tiny little alarm signals that might be going off to tell you to address something before it becomes a major problem. And for me, consistency has always been very, very important. People have actually said to me, do you run with a Garmin? Do you run with a watch? Do you run with any sort of heart rate monitor or anything? No, I don't. I just run with a basic Timex wristwatch and that's it. I work my own. And I think I'm not saying they don't work, because for some people they are fabulous. But for me, and I'm coming from an era before these things were really, really popular, the greatest computer you possess or can ever possess is in your head. So learn to listen to your own body rather than something that's bleeping on your wrist that doesn't know you've had a dreadful day and you might be coming down with a cold and you're stressed out. Oh, but I'm not meeting the goals. Learn to listen to and react to what's going on at any given time within your own body is the most important thing. See, and adjust accordingly to that and know how to adjust to that. And I think that some people do get a little bit, gadget minded, forgetting the basics kind of thing. And I'm very much a basic runner. I've got a basic diet, basic training, basic running, based on hard graft and grit. Also knowing when to pull back as well. There is a point, every runner is going to have to push through terrible pain, and even on the long runs and the training, but know when that pain is not just running pain, it's signaling a problem, and know when to check back. Listen to your own body and learn how to read your own body, because you are actually going to be the most expert person on that. Absolutely. Because you're living inside it. Absolutely.
Thank you so much for explaining that, and something that I think we all can learn a little bit from. We call that in this community, we call it no watch me. For not looking at your watch, looking at paces or anything like that. But thank you for explaining your perspective on that. It is helpful a lot. All right, we're just going to take a moment to thank our sponsors, and we'll be back with the Running for Real 4. You enjoying these cool mornings? How about the intense workouts that are just as hard as they always were? I don't know about you, but I always feel like workouts are going to be somehow easy in the fall after a hot summer, but they're still, hard. I still feel beaten up after hard days and after long runs, and I still get sore the next day, but less sore when I have Body Health Perfect Amino to speed up the recovery process. I take a lot of comfort knowing that it is working hard to repair my muscles as soon as I stop running or strength training. Then I can eat my meal, my usual 25 minutes later to fuel up again. I wish I could say I used that time to stretch, foam roll, do mobility and rehab, but let's be realistic. That doesn't always happen. Usually I'm jumping in the shower and trying to get clothes on before Bailey starts crying, or I have to do something else on my list. At least I know Body Health Perfect Amino has my back right from the stop of my watch. If you don't believe me, you can try Body Health Perfect Amino with 100% money back guarantee. So if you don't like it or you can't see a difference, you can get your money back. Use coupon code TINA10 for 10% off everything at bodyhealth.com. And if you aren't a fan of the tablets, they also have Perfect Amino XP powder, and there's a new mixed berry flavor to try. Remember, code TINA10 will get you 10% off at bodyhealth.com. Earlier in the show, I introduced you to our new sponsor, Bombas. You may remember I did a giveaway with Bombas for my birthday week, and I've been raving about them on social media. Why? Because I just love them. 2 years of research and development led to multiple improvements of the sock design, performance, and comfort, including arch support system that gives you extra support where you need it, stay-in-place technology while not being too loose, and they never leave a mark. And the seamless toe means that there's no more of that annoying bump on your toes. But you want to know the best part. 1 pair sold is 1 pair donated. Did you know that socks are the #1 most requested item in homeless shelters? But you actually can't donate used socks. That's why Bombas donates 1 brand new pair of socks for every pair they sell. To date, they've sold and donated over 9 million pairs. Bombas were created for runners, walkers, power loungers, snowboarders, Netflixers, and to me, they feel like you are getting one of those lovely tight squeeze hugs, the ones that just really mean a lot, which I love to give. Some people hate them, but I love them. And here's the bit you want to know. Running for Real listeners get 20% off your first order by going to bombas.com/runningforreal. That's BOMBAS.com/runningforreal, and you'll get 20% off your first order with code runningforreal with the number 4. All right, Fiona, 4 more questions for you, starting with, is there a photo anywhere online on social media that maybe doesn't quite show the full picture of what is going on?
Yeah, for me, in the North Pole Marathon, there's quite a lot of footage of what was really not going on there. I kept falling over and getting back up, and, it was really, really hard, and you're kind of smiling and you're thinking, oh, my Lord. So, yeah, the North Pole pictures are pretty much not indicating what was really going on, and the terror and the fear and the worry and the laps, and literally coming up towards 800 meters towards the finish of that race. I wouldn't have told you that I could actually finish it. I was so running scared, yeah. So, but I was smiling. So everybody thinks I was just smiling all the way around, but it wasn't like that at all. It was right. You're acting very well.
Well, thank you for sharing that. And I would only imagine that some things would go wrong in a race like that. All right. What about a running for real moment? You've already mentioned one with digestive issues, but something that only runners will understand.
I think I kind of said to people, it's all about being around like-minded people. Mm-hmm. And when I was in the Atacama race, you're kind of in a tent with guys you've never met, guys and girls you've never met. And it's really, really good to speak to people who actually understand the bizarre things that runners go through. For instance, I actually said to people, do you get paranoid before a race? Because when you've done the training, then you get the pre-race paranoia of thinking you've got everything under the sun, everyone that comes near you, and with you kind of, even if you've got a tradesman coming to fix the boiler, don't send anyone with a cold. Yeah. Don't send anyone with this. Do you practically want to wrap yourself in a bubble and just kind of retreat into a world of kind of stasis where there are no germs or anything? And do you imagine that you've got everything wrong with you? Because people tend to think you go to a race and it's kind of, the taper period is the good period. I actually sometimes wish when I was tapering, I was actually back in hard training, because I'm just so frightened of anything happening. I remember before the Berlin Marathon one year, I was out on a job with the animals, and I brought home 2 rescued cats. And because it'd been a long journey, I'd taken a flask with me. Mm-hmm. Just a flask. And I stopped in a lay-by, and I didn't want to open the back door because I was frightened of, opening it with the cats in there. And they weren't loose, but they were in pens. So I leaned round to reach the flask from the back seat, and I fractured 2 ribs. I compressed, I was reaching, silly maneuver, and I pressed it against a hard bit of the seat that was a little bit on the side of my seat. And I was in such pain, and it was just awful. And I thought, how could I come through 5 months of training to do the most bizarre thing before the race. And I recall that in the World Championships one year, Steffi Graf, I think, was sharing a hotel bedroom with her mother, and before the final of the 800 metres, and her mother dropped a glass on the bathroom floor and she trod on it and cut her foot open. Bizarre things that you're wary of. So I then become Miss Miserable because she's got all the training to do, then becomes Miss Paranoia. Nobody come near me. And before a lot of the races, to avoid coming into contact with anyone, I have lived in a caravan, so I've not even come into contact with Martin because he's come home and I'm on my way home now. Okay, I'll go into the caravan because he was working in an environment where I figured there's germs. I just want to get to that start line in one piece without a cold, and that's all I want now. Just get it over with.
I think we definitely can relate to that for sure.
But sometimes you think other people are looking at you like you're really weird. Even if a taxi turns up to take you to the airport, you're sitting in the back and kind of, with your hand sanitizer and you kind of, stuff you put up your nose to make sure you don't get germs on the plane. Saying, don't come near me and don't shake my hand, and you're kind of hiding. But and you think the only person in the world doing that.
Yeah, no, I definitely hear you. All right, and what about a high moment for you?
A high moment in my running. Actually, I don't know. I mean, it was pretty high a couple of weeks ago to win the last stage of the Atacama Crossing because I didn't know I was going to go out there and I didn't think I was going to do well in the race and I was worried that I could get around it. So to win the last stage, that was my recent high moment. I suppose being in Antarctica and breaking 3 world records when I'd only gone out to break 1, that was another high moment.
No, that's great. You've given us 2 there, so we're happy with that. And finally, what do you tell us? What do you tell yourself on the start line of a race?
I tell myself on the start line of a race that even though I'm nervous, I'm very lucky to be there for many, many reasons. Physically, not just physically lucky to be able to do that race, in terms of training, but physically lucky to be able to have a body that's allowed myself to be there and blessed that I can keep doing this.
Sure.
And for the first step that you take, if you're nervous, I always think, okay, I'm on my way to the finish now. So I've made it.
Yeah,
so,
I love that. That's great. Okay, Fiona, if someone wants to find out more about you, where can they go? And then also tell us about Running for Good. Why should we watch it? And anything else you'd like to share?
Yeah, well, if anybody else wants to find out anything more about me or the sanctuary, we're so heavily intertwined. So if you just search Tower Hill Stables Animal Sanctuary or Fiona Oakes on the internet, marathons, you're going to find out pretty much everything about me. My running is very heavily intertwined with the animals and the sanctuary and the promotion of veganism. So whatever aspect you're interested in, there'll be something in there for you. The film Running for Good came about totally by accident and surprise to me. Fairly eminent filmmakers, especially within the vegan community, Keegan Kuhn and Kip Anderson, made Cowspiracy and What the Health films, both about the different aspects of veganism. And a couple of years ago, Keegan contacted me and said, introduced himself and said, I'd like to make my next documentary about you. That's and great. I actually thought it was a complete joke. I thought it probably been messing around on the internet or something like that. And I said, why on earth would anyone be interested in watching a film about me? And he said, from a athletics point of view, I think they'd be interested in your running, but from the veganism point of view, the way you have conducted yourself throughout your running career, the reason behind the reason you're out there is very, very important. And I always say to people, okay, people think that as a vegan or a plant-based athlete, you're not going to be as well prepared as a non-plant-based athlete. But I would say within any sport, it's not just about physical preparation, it's about mental preparation too. And mentally, I'm ready to run because for me, myself, I'm where I need to be to run. So Keegan contacted me and said he thought that the film would be interesting. I think if it was interesting to anybody, any runner out there or anybody invested in any sort of sport, it's because I'm very, very much just like anybody else. Yeah. I've got the same worries, the same fears, fitting it in, wearing my socks, digging them out of the washing machine. Oh, I forgot to turn it on yesterday. Very, very basic and achieving at a relatively high level, just on a very, very basic, normal way. I think
I love
it's the story of life.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yes, I have to confess, I have not watched it yet, but it is in my plans to watch it. And I will have watched it by the time this comes out. I've heard a lot of people saying how inspiring it is. So I definitely recommend people check it out. And Fiona, thank you so much for your time, for sharing your insights and for doing your part to make this world a better place than when you arrived. So thank you for all that you do.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
My friends, if you have a minute and you could leave a review on your favorite podcast player, Apple Podcasts, aka iTunes, Stitcher, Overcast, Pocket Cast, Spotify, or whatever else podcast player you use to listen to this podcast, or if you would subscribe to this podcast, you will help me get out in front of new runners to make our tribe even bigger and even better. It might not seem like you as one person can make a difference, but really it helps a lot. And it shows me you appreciate the hard work I put in for those. Thank you so much. I hope you are able to keep up with Fiona's fast talking there. I'm just kidding, but I know from experience that sometimes Americans can struggle to understand when we Brits talk fast. So you may need to go back and listen to that one again. I just love how Fiona has managed to combine the things that are most important to her and use, well, running for good, as she calls it, to help bring awareness to the things that matter. I'm excited to watch Running for Good, and I really hope you check it out and enjoy it as well. There are links to that and everything else we talked about today in the show notes at tinamuir.com/episode 87. And you'll notice that I had some questions from Patreon members today. Now, if you are appreciating these podcasts, the emails, the social media, all this free stuff that I give you, and you want to give back, help me, you can always go to patreon.com/runningforreal. You can also find links in the show notes. Again, that's tinamuir.com/episode 87. And you can just give a small amount, whatever you like, per month to help support me and mean that I can continue to do this. And the more support that I have from you guys, the more time I can spend on doing the things that are going to help bring you value, that you're going to appreciate, because then I can bring on someone to help me with all the little tasks that none of us really like doing, but we kind of have to be doing. So thank you so much to everyone who has supported me on Patreon. You obviously got to hear some of your questions today, and for future episodes, you can also find out up to 6 weeks in advance who is coming on the show and get your questions in. Next week is my annual gift guide episode. I'm going to talk about the running and some mother products I have been loving that I recommend to you. If you're still looking for gifts, or let's be real, if you haven't even started yet, this will be a great place to begin, and I hope you check it out next week. Until then, have a great week.
Thanks for listening to the Running for Real podcast. Be sure to check out tinamuir.com for show notes and even more helpful running information.